The ceremony was held in a room that smelled like ozone and bad news. Yael Ostrovsky stood in the third row of the human delegation and counted the exits. There were 4. One was behind a cluster of Karathi diplomats, 11-limbed, slow-moving, the kind of species that looked ancient because they were. One was near the stage. One was disguised as a wall panel that nobody else in the human group had noticed. She had noticed it 12 minutes ago. Old habit. The hall held 11 species. All of them were applauding in whatever way their biology allowed. The Drakari used their lower jaw membranes. The Solvan rippled their skin in overlapping waves. The Karathi raised and lowered their middle 4 limbs in a slow rhythm that looked like a tree in wind. It was the most polite room Yael had ever stood in. It was also the most afraid. She could feel it the way she used to feel a room with a device in it, something under the surface, something with weight, something that had already made a decision about the future and wasn't telling anyone yet. The conclave's high scribe moved to the front of the stage. He was Solvan. His skin shifted through 3 colors as he walked. He held a document that had taken, Yael had been told, 40 hours to write, mostly the title. He read it aloud. Elite Warrior Corps. The human delegation went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means moved, not the kind that means proud. The kind that moves through soldiers when they accept a thing they did not choose, but will carry anyway. It was a specific silence. Yael had heard it in EOD briefing rooms. She had heard it in hangars before bad drops. It had a texture. The alien delegations kept applauding. Veth Scholl stood at the far left of the stage, all 11 limbs folded in what served as his version of standing at attention. He was watching the humans, not with ceremony, with the specific focus of a being who has watched many things begin and has learned to read the first seconds of something. He watched the quiet move through the human delegation like a current. He filed it. He did not know what to do with it yet. After the ceremony, there was food, or things that were meant to approximate food for 11 different biologies. Yael stood near a long table, holding something in a cup that the Kirathi attendant had described as nourishing. She had not drunk it. She was watching the room. General Hask found her. He was the kind of officer who wore the uniform like armor and smiled like it was part of the uniform. He said something about historic moments, about humanity's role, about the opportunity this represented. Yael said, "Sir, I'd like the casualty figures from the last 6 conclave engagements with the Vorkai." Hask's smile held, but his eyes changed. "That's not really, sir." He left to find someone else to talk to. She went looking for Veth Scholl. He was in a side corridor, standing alone in the way his species stood alone, all 11 limbs slightly lowered, the posture that their biology used for thinking. He turned 3 of his eyes toward her when she approached. The other 6 kept watching the middle distance. Commander Ostrovsky. Ambassador. She stood beside him. She looked at the wall. He looked at the wall. "I want the casualty figures." The conclave's preference is to introduce that data during the formal strategy briefings scheduled for. "I'm not asking for a preference." One set of limbs moved, then another. The Karathi had 3 brains that operated in something close to committee. Yael had read that in the briefing files. Right now she could almost see the vote happening. Then he produced a small tablet from somewhere in the arrangement of his robes. He held it out. She took it. She read. The figures were organized by engagement, by system, by species contribution. The columns went back 91 years. The numbers in the lost column were the kind that stopped feeling like numbers after a while and started feeling like something else, something geological, something that had been accumulating in layers for a long time before anyone thought to measure it. Yael read the whole document. She set the tablet down on the small ledge that ran along the corridor wall. "Noted," she said. She looked back at the hall, at the 11 species and their various ways of applauding, at the banner, that still hung above the stage with the designation on it. At her own people, standing in clusters, some of them still holding their cups of approximate food, looking like what they were, a species that had been spacefaring for a generation, and had been handed a war that had been grinding for 91 years. Veth Shal watched her. He had attended 4 ceremonies like this one. Each one had been for a species the Conclave was quietly hoping could change the shape of a war that the math kept saying was already finished. He had watched each of those species receive their designations. He had watched the speeches. He had watched the applause. He had filed the reports. He had also attended the later ceremonies, the smaller ones, the ones without banners. He was good at watching beginnings now. He had learned, across 4 species and 91 years, to read them in the first seconds, to feel the weight in the room. To know the difference between a species that believed the title and a species that had simply decided to carry it. The humans had not believed it. They had decided to carry it. He did not know yet what the difference meant in practice. He had his suspicions. They were the kind of suspicions that a being with 3 brains kept in the part of the mind that handled things too fragile to examine directly. "Commander," he said. She was already walking back toward the hall. "The briefings begin at 0600, he said. "I'll be there at 0530, she said, without turning around. "Have the full engagement history ready. Not summaries. Everything." He watched her go. Around him, the 11 species continued their ceremony. Music was playing somewhere. 4-tone, slow, the Conclave's version of something hopeful. It had been written after the Sorelli fell. It had been played at every ceremony since. Veth Shal stood in the corridor and listened to it, and thought about the quiet that had moved through the human delegation like a current. He thought about what it meant that they had not believed the title. He thought about what it meant that they had picked it up anyway. The music played. The hall glowed with 11 different biological light spectrums, all of them overlapping into something that was not quite any one color. Outside the station, 14 months away, at current Vorkai expansion speed, the math was moving toward them. It had no opinion about ceremonies. It had no opinion about hope. It just moved. Yael walked back into the hall and started memorizing faces. Veth Shal had watched 4 species go to war with the Vorkai. He had watched all 4 of them lose. Not quickly. The Vorkai did not do things quickly. They did things the way deep water moves, without urgency, without anger, without any apparent awareness that the thing being drowned had feelings about the process. They calculated. They advanced. They waited for the numbers to finish the sentence they had already started. It always ended the same way. Veth Shal had filed the reports, all of them. He had very good handwriting. He had 3 brains, and he still found the reports hard to write. Tonight he was watching the command link feed from a monitoring station 3 systems away from the engagement. He was watching because it was his job to watch. He was also watching because he had promised himself 4 species ago that he would not look away. It felt important, not useful, just important. The border system was called HFY War in Kirathi. The humans had started calling it Gate 7. Yael's units had been positioned there for 11 days, building what she called a reception, which her translator rendered for Veth Shal as something closer to a prepared welcome for something that would not enjoy being welcomed. The Vorkai advance units arrived at 0312 station time. Their opening formation was a specific shape. Veth Shal had seen this shape before. Every species in the Conclave had seen it in historical records. It was the shape the Vorkai used for a border system engagement against an opponent they had assessed as manageable. Not weak, not a trivial fight. Just within the model. Accounted for. By every projection the Conclave had run, this formation against any given opponent produced a result within 11 hours. Not a massacre. Just a conclusion. The kind where the losing side withdraw in reasonable order, and the Vorkai marked the system and moved the line on their maps. The Conclave's own tactical AI gave the engagement a 91% probability of resolving within that window. Veth Shoal watched the feed. Minute 1. The human formation did something. Veth Shoal watched the Conclave's monitoring system flag it with a yellow indicator, which meant unexpected but within acceptable variance. He had seen yellow indicators before. They meant nothing. Minute 4. Another thing. Another flag. This one was a different shade of yellow that technically meant variance requiring notation. The Vorkai's formation adjusted. This was normal. The Vorkai always adjusted. That was the point of the model. It adjusted in real time, absorbed new inputs, recalculated. That was why it always won. Minute 7. The data feed from the Vorkai intercept system, which the Conclave had been quietly reading for 30 years, a fact that had never changed the outcome of anything, carried a single word Veth Shoal had not seen in that feed before. His translator rendered it as recalculating. He sat very still. The unit's designation was Fireteam 6, 4 humans, cut off from the main formation at the 19-minute mark, when the Vorkai sealed the corridor behind them with a suppression field. On paper, in any tactical model, in any calculation run by any of the 11 Conclave species across 91 years of this war, there were 2 things a unit in that position could do: retreat to a defensible subposition and wait for extraction, or hold the subposition until the math finished the sentence. Those were the options. Both were rational. The Vorkai had responses to both. Clean, practiced, well-tested responses. Fireteam 6 did a third thing. Veth Shoal watched the feed and had trouble describing it even to himself. They moved toward the suppression field. Not to retreat through it, not to hold against it. They did something with 2 pieces of equipment that individually had specific standard functions, and combined in this particular way, had no business doing what they then did. The suppression field inverted. For approximately 9 seconds, the Vorkai advance unit on the other side was standing in the thing they had been using as a weapon. 9 seconds was enough. Fireteam 6 came out the other side. All 4 of them. They were not running. They were moving the way people move when they are angry and conserving the anger for later. Veth Shoal realized he had stopped breathing. He was Kirathi. He had 4 respiratory systems. He started 2 of them back up. The engagement ran for 31 hours. At hour 14, the Conclave's tactical AI quietly dropped its probability assessment and stopped updating. Not because the system failed, because the inputs had stopped conforming to any framework the system had been designed to interpret. At hour 22, the Vorkai intercept feed used the word recalculating 4 more times, then a different word that Veth Shoal's translator struggled with for 6 minutes before rendering it as something close to reference failure. The Vorkai adjusted and adjusted and adjusted. The model was good. It was the best model in the known galaxy. It absorbed new data in real time and updated its assessments and shifted its formations with the smooth mechanical certainty of a machine that had never been wrong about a thing it had decided to understand. The problem was that understanding something required the thing to hold still long enough to be understood. At hour 31, the Vorkai withdrew from Gate 7. Not destroyed, not broken. They withdrew with full order, full formation, the way they always withdrew from things that needed more calculation. They had never needed more calculation before. Veth Shoal had not known withdrawal was in their vocabulary until tonight. He sat in the monitoring station for a long time after the feed went quiet. Then he pulled up the engagement report that the Conclave system had been automatically generating. Most of the fields were standard. Losses, movement, resource expenditure. System status, which now read Retained human forces. He had never seen those words in that field before. He read them 3 times. At the bottom of the report, there was a field for enemy tactical assessment. It was a field that every conclave engagement report carried. In 91 years of war, it had always been filled in by the automated system with a doctrine classification. The Vorkai had a known doctrine. It had a name and a code and a bibliography. The automated system had tried to fill in the field for the human engagement. It had left a single word, undefined. Veth Scholl looked at that word for a long time. Outside the monitoring station, the star at the center of the Gate 7 system was doing what stars do. Burning, slow, indifferent, present. It had been burning since before the Vorkai began their expansion. It had no opinion about the report. Veth Scholl had 3 brains, and all of them were doing something that was either thinking or something adjacent to thinking that did not have a clean name. He was trying to file a response to the word undefined. He could not find the right folder. He saved the report. He stood. He looked at the star. Then, very quietly, with no one watching, with 11 limbs and 3 brains and 91 years of careful, precise, well-documented grief, he wept. Not for the loss. They had not lost tonight. For the first time in a very long time, they had not lost. That was the part he did not know how to hold. The conclave gave Yael a room, a chair, and access to everything. That last part was new. She had been told, in the early weeks, that full access to the historical combat archive would be released in stages. Processed, organized, introduced with context. The conclave had a process for sharing information with new allies. It involved layers. It involved time. After Gate 7, they opened everything at once. She read for 6 hours without stopping. The room was small. It had a light she couldn't fully turn off, and a temperature she couldn't quite adjust, and a chair designed for a species with a different number of joints in different places. She sat in it anyway. After the first hour, she stopped noticing it. She read the way she used to read bomb schematics, systematically, starting with structure, then components, then the part where something had gone wrong, and why. 91 years of engagements, 47 major systems contested. 11 species contributing forces at various points. Thousands of individual battle reports organized by date, by system, by outcome. The outcomes column was mostly one word. She did not let herself slow down at that column. She read through it the way you read through a weather report for a storm that has already passed. Informational, not personal. She was looking for a pattern. She found it on hour 3. The conclave's own analysts had not named it. It was spread across the data, the way things are when no one wants to look at them directly. Present, consistent, documented in the individual reports, but never assembled into a single statement. She assembled it. Every species that had fought the Vorkai had, at a certain point in their engagement, stopped improvising. Not because they got worse, because they got better. They learned. They developed doctrine. They built the best possible approach based on everything they had experienced, and they applied it consistently, because consistent application of optimal strategy was how you won wars. That was the moment it changed. Not the defeats. The defeats happened all the time. Defeats could be recovered from. What could not be recovered from was the moment a species became predictable. The Vorkai's model was built to absorb inputs and recalculate. It was patient. It was thorough. What it needed, the one thing it needed, was for its opponent to make decisions that followed patterns. Once the patterns were visible, the model could see ahead of them. Once the model could see ahead, the conclusion was not a matter of if, only when. Every species, as they improved, had given the model what it needed. Every species had tried their absolute best. That was the part that sat in her chest like a stone. She found the Sorelli file near the end of hour 5. The Sorelli were not a species anyone in the human delegation had been briefed on. They were not in the public-facing conclave histories. They were in the archive the way old wounds are in the body. Healed over, not gone. She read slowly this time. They had been the conclave's best hope 40 years ago, a species with faster reaction times than any other in the Alliance. Innovative, aggressive in the best tactical sense. They had produced results in their first engagements that the conclave had not seen since the war began. They had been given a designation. The designation was 2 words: exemplary combatants. The phrasing the conclave had used before they updated their translation matrix, before they found the human words. She looked at those 2 words for a while. Then she read the rest. The Sorelli had lasted 7 years after the designation. 7 years of extraordinary, documented, thoroughly archived effort. 7 years of being the best version of what they were. And then the model had them. The file ended with a standard notation in the conclave's archive system. A date, a system name, a status field that read, Civilization, concluded. Yale closed the file. She sat in the bad chair, under the light she couldn't turn off, and she looked at the wall for a while. She found Vethshal in the corridor outside the War Council chamber. He was talking to 2 Drekari advisors in the low, careful way he talked when he was managing something. She waited. He wrapped up the conversation in 4 sentences and moved toward her. Commander, I need a minute. They stood together. She was looking at the floor. He was looking at her, looking at the floor. Or 3 of his eyes were. The other 6 were doing their usual job of watching everything else. The Sorelli, she said. He was quiet. How long after the designation? Commander, the full context of the Sorelli engagement requires... How long? Another pause. The kind that was not hesitation, but rather the small, careful act of a being deciding which truth to carry into a room. 7 years, he said. She nodded. She had known. She had just needed to hear it said out loud. She turned to go. Commander, his voice was careful, not soft, careful, the way you are with something that is carrying more than it is showing. The Sorelli were extraordinary. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. I know, she said. A beat. The corridor hummed with the ambient sound of a station doing what stations do. Moving air, holding pressure, pretending the outside is not what it is. That's what worries me, she said. She walked away. Vethshal stood in the corridor. He had 3 brains. All 3 of them were working on what she meant, and all 3 of them had arrived at the same answer at the same time, which did not happen often. She meant, extraordinary things are understandable. Understandable things become predictable. Predictable things end up in the outcomes column with 1 word. She was not afraid of failing. She was afraid of becoming good enough to fail in the way the Sorelli had. Brilliantly. In ways the conclave would archive carefully and never quite recover from. Vethshal stood very still. In his long life, he had met many kinds of courage. He had filed reports on most of them. He had watched courage fail, and hold, and burn out, and echo forward through the records of species that were no longer around to know they were being remembered. He had not, before tonight, met the kind that was afraid of its own potential. He thought about that for a long time. Then he went back to work, because there was always more work, and the work did not care what you were thinking. 6 months in, the War Council stopped using the word losing. They used repositioning. They used strategic consolidation. They used graceful withdrawal, which was a phrase Vethshal had heard before, in other wars, from other species, and which always meant the same thing underneath the careful grammar. Done. Not today, not in one blow. But the direction was visible now, to anyone willing to read the direction. 3 systems in 10 weeks. Gate 7 held, and 6 others after it. But the Vorkai had found a rhythm. Not against the humans, not yet. but around them. They were not fighting Yale's units directly. They were pressing the Conclave's flanks, the Allied systems, the supply paths that humanity needed intact to keep operating at the level that had made Gate 7 possible. They were not trying to beat the humans. They were trying to make the humans irrelevant. It was, Vetschol thought, the highest form of respect the Vorkai had ever paid a species they were planning to erase. The intelligence report arrived on a Tuesday by station calendar. It was formatted like all intelligence reports, dry, organized, written in the Conclave's standard notation that had been developed specifically to remove emotional content from information that might otherwise cause someone to act on it. Vetschol read it 3 times. The Vorkai had built a new submodel. That sentence did not look like much. He understood that. To someone reading it without context, it was 4 words about a computational process. Unremarkable. But the Vorkai did not build new submodels. They had one model. They had maintained one model across 91 years and 47 contested systems, and 4 species they had engaged and concluded. The model absorbed data and updated internally, but its fundamental architecture had never changed. Until now. The new submodel was built specifically for human engagement patterns. The Vorkai had never done this for any other species. They had never needed to. No other species had required a separate framework. No other species had bent the model sideways enough that the model needed a dedicated extension just to track them. Vetschol read the report again. He understood the compliment. He also understood what came after compliments. He ran the simulations himself. The Conclave's tactical system had 3 on file. Projections based on the new Vorkai submodel inputs, run against current human deployment and resource levels. Humanity lost all 3. Not badly, not in the way the Conclave's own forces lost. There were no clean 11-hour conclusions. The simulations ran long. The models struggled in all 3. There were moments in each projection where the human forces did something that required a pause and a recalculation. But the model had the framework now. It had 6 months of human behavior to build from. It was learning the shape of what Yal's people did when they were cornered, when they were advancing, when they were improvising. It was learning to expect the unexpected, which was the only thing that made the unexpected usable. In all 3 simulations, the model caught up. In all 3 simulations, the conclusion arrived, just later than before. Vetschol closed the simulations. He sat in his office, which was very tidy, which it always was when things were very bad, because tidying was the thing his 3 brains defaulted to when they needed to do something with their hands while processing. He thought about the Sorelli. He thought about the other 3 before the Sorelli. He thought about the word undefined in the Gate 7 report, which he had saved in a separate file that he looked at sometimes. Not for tactical reasons. For the same reason a person keeps a photograph of something they do not want to forget. He thought about Yale, standing in the corridor, saying, "That's what worries me." The War Council met that evening. The Conclave did not vote on things like this formally, because a formal vote created a formal record, and a formal record meant the word withdrawal appeared in the archive next to species names and system coordinates. And the archive lasted longer than the decisions did, and longer than the people who made them, and everyone in the room understood the weight of what got written down. So they discussed. They reached consensus. They used careful language. The phrase graceful withdrawal was used 7 times. Vetschol counted. He had 3 brains, and none of them had a counter-argument that the room would accept. Because the simulations were what the simulations were, and the data was what the data was, and being right about what the data did not contain, the irrational thing, the third option, the choice that did not exist in any model, was not something he could put into a sentence that would survive contact with 11 species who had been losing for 91 years and were very tired. He understood, tired. He left the council chamber and went to write the communication to Yael. He wrote 9 drafts. The first was direct. She would want direct. He deleted it because direct also meant saying the word withdrawal in plain language to someone who did not have the vocabulary for it, and he was not certain she would accept the word. The second was more contextual. He deleted it because it was long, and she did not read long things, and she would not read it in time. Drafts 3 through 8 were variations on the same failure. Too careful, too much like a report, too much like the language of a being who had filed the same communication 4 times before for 4 other species. The 9th draft was 2 sentences. He looked at it. He started the 10th. His communication terminal made a sound. He had a message. It was from Yael. It had been sent 11 minutes ago, which meant she had sent it while the War Council was still technically in session, which meant she knew, which meant she had sources he had not accounted for, or instincts that functioned as sources, and either answer told him something important. He opened the message. 6 words. We're not done. Pull the models. Not a question, not a request, not a proposal for consideration by the relevant conclave bodies. 6 words. The way a door closing is 6 inches of movement. Small thing, complete action. No ambiguity about what it means. Vethshal's 3 brains received the message. 2 of them immediately began assessing tactical feasibility, resource implications, the probability math on any scenario where those 6 words led to an outcome different from the 3 simulations he had just watched. The 3rd brain voted differently. In 91 years of filing reports, Vethshal had never had a split vote on a question of strategy. He stared at the message. He thought about the fact that the model had been wrong once before, at Gate 7, where it had faced a thing it had no framework for and returned the word undefined. He thought about the fact that undefined was not the same as impossible. He closed the 9 unfinished drafts. He typed a reply. It was also short. Show me what you have. He sent it. Then he sat very still and waited, and tried very hard not to feel the specific, dangerous, poorly advised thing that was building in the part of his mind he normally kept very tightly organized. He recognized the feeling. He had not felt it in 40 years. He had almost forgotten it was still in there. Hope was an untidy thing to find in a tidy office. Yael had been asked 3 times in the planning sessions to explain the strategy. 3 times she had tried. The first attempt had run 8 minutes before a Karathi tactical advisor stopped her and asked her to identify the decision point where the plan transitioned from the initial engagement phase to the secondary push. She had looked at him and said there wasn't one. He had asked her to clarify. She had spent 4 minutes clarifying. He had asked again. She had said, "We don't decide in advance. We decide when we're in it." The room had gone quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when 11 species of beings who have been fighting a calculating enemy for 91 years hear someone describe a plan that cannot be written down because it does not exist yet. Vethshal, from the back of the room, had not said anything. But 2 of his eyes had done something that in Karathi meant, "I see it." The other 9 had kept watching the room. The engagement began at 0200. The Vorkai's new submodel was running. Vethshal could see its effects in the feed, the way their formations adjusted faster now, the way their response times had tightened since Gate 7, the way the early minutes of the engagement had a different quality than before, measured, waiting for the patterns it had learned to recognize. It recognized the first movement. It adjusted. It recognized the second. It adjusted again. For 9 minutes, the engagement ran the way the simulations had projected. Not a collapse. Humanity did not collapse, had not collapsed in any engagement, would apparently not collapse as a behavioral option, but a press. A slow tightening. The model seeing ahead by 3 moves, then 4, the gap narrowing between what Yael's people did and what the model expected them to do. Vethshal watched and said nothing, and held very still. Then minute 10 happened. He could not describe it cleanly afterward. He tried, 4 times, in the report. They were insufficient. What happened was this. A unit in the eastern corridor under full pressure, with extraction unavailable, and 2 options in the model, retreat to sub-position or hold, did something that was neither. But it was not the Gate 7 third option either. It was a different third option. A new one. Built from the specific conditions of this specific moment. From the specific people in that specific corridor, who had run their own math, and arrived at a conclusion the Vorkai submodel had not been built for, because it had not existed before now. The submodel saw it, flagged it, began recalculating. While it was recalculating, the Western unit did something else. The submodel split its processing, flagged the second behavior, began a second recalculation while the first was still running. Then the central push hit. The submodel had 17 active recalculation threads running simultaneously when the central push hit. Vethshal had never seen 17 threads before. He had not known the submodel could run 17 threads. He was not certain the Vorkai had known either. The feed was hard to follow after that. Not because it went dark. Because it moved the way things move when the shape of what is happening keeps changing before the eye can settle on it. Yael's people were not running a strategy. They were running something more like a living thing, each unit aware of the others, responding to what the others did, building something that had no name because it had never been assembled before and would never be assembled in exactly the same way again. The model needed patterns. It had built its entire existence on the fact that any sufficiently studied opponent would eventually produce patterns. These people were not producing patterns. They were producing decisions, individual, specific, human decisions, made by people inside the thing instead of above it. And no 2 decisions were made from the same place, because no 2 people were standing in the same place, and no 2 places were the same as they had been 30 seconds ago. You cannot model a decision that the person making it is still deciding as they make it. The math has to wait for the decision to finish. The decision never finished. It just became the next decision. Not all of them came home. Vethshal would not let the report use numbers for that part. He had asked Yael for the names, and she had given them to him without asking why, which meant she understood why, and he filed them in the report where the casualty count usually lived. Sergeant Dara Mwangi, Specialist Okonkwo, Corporal Priya Selvan, Lieutenant Tomas Reyes. 4 names. He wrote them carefully. He had 3 brains, and all 3 of them slowed down when he wrote them. The names would stay in the archive longer than the battle. That was the point. That was the only point he could offer. The Vorkai withdrew at hour 19. Not from Gate 7, from the theater. From the 3 systems they had been pressing for 2 months. From the flanks they had been slowly building pressure on. All of it. In the span of 4 hours, pulling back in the clean, ordered way they always withdrew. No panic, no haste, just the movement of a force that had made a decision about what required more calculation. They had never withdrawn from this much at once. Thresnell's engagement report, intercepted, translated, filed, contained a field that Vethshal read 6 times. The probability assessment for the continued engagement. The Vorkai ran probability assessments on every opponent, every engagement, every species they had ever approached. The number lived in a specific field in a specific report, and it was always a number, and it always resolved, and the resolution was always towards 0 on a long enough timeline. The field had a number. The number was not 0. The field beneath it, the one marked projection confidence, contained a word. His translator rendered it undefined. Vethshal looked at that word for a long time. He had first seen it at Gate 7, in a conclave report about human doctrine. Now it was in a Vorkai report, about a probability they could not resolve. The math had looked at humanity. The math did not know what to do with humanity. The math had left. He wrote the official report that night. 4 drafts, all deleted. The problem was that the report needed to explain what had happened, and what had happened was not something the Conclave's standard reporting framework had a category for. He could describe the movements. He could document the outcomes. He could file the names. But the thing that had happened, the actual center of it, the reason the Vorkai were recalculating in a system 3 jumps away instead of advancing through this one, that thing did not fit in a field. He wrote one final addendum, 11 words. He attached it to the original designation document from the ceremony 6 months ago, the one with the banner and the approximate food, and Yael reading the casualty figures and saying, "Noted." He wrote, "Designation confirmed. Original assessment was correct by mechanisms we did not understand at the time." He filed it. Yael was at the viewport when he found her. The system star was on the left side of the glass. She was looking at it the way she looked at things when she was doing math, and the math was not finished yet. One of her soldiers, young, tired in the specific way of someone who has been awake for 30 hours doing necessary things, came and stood near her. "What do we do now?" he asked. Not a strategic question, not tactical, just the question a person asks when the shape of the next moment has not arrived yet. Yael looked at the star. She thought about 14 systems still on the Vorkai's expansion path. She thought about the Sorelli and 7 years and the names that should be in the archive and sometimes weren't. She thought about a word in a Vorkai report that translated as undefined. She thought about what it meant that the math had looked at them and not finished its sentence. "We do it again," she said. Not a speech, not a rallying cry, not the kind of thing that gets carved into anything. Just the next true thing. The star burned. The system held. Somewhere 3 jumps away, the best calculating intelligence in the known galaxy was rebuilding a model for an opponent it could not resolve. It would come back. It always came back. And when it did, it would find the same thing it had found tonight. Not a strategy, not a doctrine, not a system it could learn and predict and conclude. Just people. Deciding. One impossible, irrational, unmodelable decision at a time. The cosmos had hoped for many things over many years. Most of them had been reasonable hopes, logical hopes, hopes that made sense given the available data. This one had been different. This one had worked.